All right, you're listening to Africana Studies on Sankofa Revolutionary Radio, WSYP LP 95.1 FM in Birmingham, Alabama, coming to you live every Saturday for an hour to discuss all things related to Africana Studies. And on this program, I have a special guest, the elder brother Sababu Shabaka, who was an old-time colleague and elder statesman at my former campus, Morgan State University. And when I arrived at Morgan State in the mid 80s, Brother Shabaka was holding it down with a couple other elders that we'll talk about. But, he was right there in my development when I was in my 20s and was there to help contribute and consistently work with me and other students. So we reconnected actually on the program here, Africana Studies, just recently. So welcome, Baba Shabaka.
Yeah, greetings, brother, and thank you for this invitation. It's been a long time, brother Manu, since I saw you, and when I heard you a couple of times, I said we had to hook up. But it was a pleasure, brother, and you was always on the task, man, of doing the job and doing the work. And it seemed like after all these years, a couple decades, you're still doing the work. So it's good to hear you, brother.
Well, I appreciate it. Yeah, I appreciate it. And, a lot of times people, see us down the road when we've made certain contributions but they don't really necessarily understand the journey and the process to get to where we are after we've made some contributions. And so you're one of the, I would say, maybe an unsung hero who was there in the trenches, because nobody makes a significant contribution by themselves. And so while people know the general outline that I went to Morgan State in Baltimore in '84, I transferred, and I suddenly recognized there were contradictions that a lot of students were talking about, that here you have historically Black college, and yet there was no requirement to learn or teach African history. And that first semester when I was there in fall of '84, I'd said to myself, that actually they're right, doesn't make any sense. But then after some months, I recognized that it was just rhetoric, that these students were not going to do anything about it. So in April of '85, I decided to start a petition to make African history a requirement. And that's when I really began to assert leadership on campus. And then a couple students, they said, you know what, you need to meet Professor Ware. So they told me about Gary Ware and social and mental health. And so I called him from the student government. And I remember maybe 20 minutes later, he came over to the office, and that started a relationship where he was, fundamental to my growth and development. And then as I started working with the All African People's Revolutionary Party as a student organizer on campus, having events, I started a newsletter. Then you were there, and you were there consistently. And so, as I say, I think you're one of the unsung elders who are always there at the conferences, the events, on campus, off campus. So it's really my pleasure and surprise that we connected again, but because of our longstanding partnership as an elder and me as a young student, just trying to make a contribution during those days.
Well, it was good to see you. Just see you now, but it was good to see you then, because the young people. I came from UDC, just across the pond, across the Beltways, and
in DC.
In DC, yeah, University District of Columbia. In fact, I was the first one. After I was initially in New Jersey, I worked for the telephone company there. I did some master's work there in mathematics. So I came and was attempting to do some work at Howard. Then I hooked up with Kwame Ture, and he and others, got me involved also in the party called African People Revolutionary Party towards the end of the 1970s, early 1980s. And I went over to UDC. I left Howard because a Jewish advisor, I'm in a Black school, man. This is Howard University. And I get I get a Jewish advisor, right? And so we were clashing. At that time, the Iran thing was going on. And of course, he was talking about Israel. I said, yeah, and he didn't like my mannerism, and so we clashed. And so I left there and went over to UDC to teach. And but the students, as much as I wanted to, the students were not where I thought they should have been. In fact, we had student organizing units from the All African People Revolutionary Party. And I used to invite them to my classes. I used to go to other classes, invite them to other professors who were sensitive classes, until the point that we got a little sensitivity, but not, not before the administration said, no, this is not the way we do. This is a Black university, man. Always a Black university, Howard, UDC. So I said, I left DC, I spent a few years there, and I went to Morgan, faculty member who.
Where did you start in Morgan State? In what year?
I started at Morgan in the late, after I left the military. 69, I believe I started Morgan. I left the military in 68 and then went to Morgan in 69 and graduated in 73, I believe, 72. All right, in mathematics and physics, I had a double major. And then I left there for Bell Labs up in New Jersey. And it was there that I got hooked up with Amiri Baraka and his CAP. And then later on, just before leaving there to come back to DC, I met Kwame Ture. He was doing one of his tours in New Jersey and New York. Went to listen to him, talk to him. And man, it was a big thing down that period, because at that time I was becoming a little bit more aware. I had joined the nation just prior to getting out of the service. Interestingly, while I was in the service, I was shipped down to Cuba. I was in the Navy. I was shipped down to Cuba, and it looked like I was the only Black in the electrician and electronics shop. And it looked like all of the Europeans came from Georgia or Alabama. And so we clashed. And I'm just what they call an E1, E2. So I didn't have any rank. And see, these were petty officers or non-commissioned officers, man. So they wiped me under the bus. All right. But it was only, and I remember that specifically because it was a Black chief, the only Black chief, that I knew in Guantanamo Bay, who took me under his wing. If it wasn't under his wing, man, either I would be dead or I would have had a dishonorable discharge. But it was a Black chief, and he taught me everything I needed to know about planes, okay? And he allowed me from that to learn, and of course, I could do the academics. So, I always passed my test. I just needed to get the training. And so by being with him, I got the training I need about the electrical and mechanical systems of the various planes that was under the command. So that was a good experience. And from that experience, I learned a lot. And so I came out of that military experience, used the GI Bill to go to school and get a degree at Morgan, and then go to the New Jersey to get another degree, the degree in nationalism. Okay. Now I joined the nation, so I got a little bit of that. But my mother was very Christian, and so she died in 70. So I just, I did it, in the closet, to speak. But the message to the Black man was the message that I wanted to hear, and particularly after coming out of the military. And hearing the N-word that we can't mention, that's the references that they made all the time there. Being the only Black in the shop, all right. Everybody else were someplace else. So that was an educational experience, an enlightening experience. And then when I got to, after I left UDC and got to Morgan, that's when I met Brother Gary Ware. And I said, oh man, we got some conscious people here. So Morgan is going to be the place. Until I got to my department, then I found out, no, we just one and few, brother. It was like UDC. but brother Gary kept the message going. He kept insight. He would always inform me of what's going on. And then more spectacular is when I found out a serious student. That was you, brother. I mean, there were, now look, I'm talking about, you know, from the time that I left UDC, okay, and went to Morgan in the mid to late 80s, okay, and I came to DC in 80, went to Howard to do some graduate work, and then there were just no conscious people. Everybody was in turn trying to get the degree in order to make it in this white man's world. And as a consequence of that, it was discouraging to me because I held the belief that everything that negatively happened to my personal family, I could put a finger on as being orchestrated, you know, by the Europeans in this country. All right, so I didn't need to hear that I needed to be anything but myself and to pursue what is necessary in order to bring and inform other Black folks that I come in contact with.
So let me ask you. So so when did you return to Morgan to start teaching, and in what department were you teaching in when you went back to teach?
Well, I stayed at UDC until about 85, 87. In fact, I stopped teaching full time and I taught a course once or twice a week. I went to Morgan probably in 87, I believe, 86, 87. I have to check the dates. And I came to the math department because a brother who was a physicist from Morgan, I met at Bell Labs in New Jersey, and he told me, you know, I should look him up. And then when I looked him up, you know, I had degrees in math. He introduced me to the math chair at that time, and we hit it off pretty well. He had gone to the continent and returned, and he liked my approach to his teaching, you know, because I used to make, when I was at UDC, what I would make my students do, depending on the course. Now, a lot of times we had courses in which you had to do some programming. So I let them collect data from the various departments that they were in, all right, and develop a program. Now, apparently, they got me in trouble at UDC because professors used to complain to my department chair, hey, this man is teaching outside of his discipline. He's got students. I said, I just got them collecting data. That's all I want to do. I'm showing them how to use the data. They're in the history, so let them collect some history data. Now you teaching them history. Well, baby. But anyway, man, so that was my realm. I used to have the teacher, the student work. They had to not just learn book study, they had to be out there and doing field work. You know, I mean, whatever department you were in, collect some data from that, and now let's see what we're going to develop. Give me a project first, and then from that we would move. And I got that a little bit from Brother Gary, you know, because I saw, you know, how he was conducting some of his classes. Man, he really inspired me when I was at Morgan. Maybe safeguard me too, because he told me some of the ropes and who I needed to avoid, and stuff like that. So it was a pleasure, you know, under his tutelage to be able to maneuver. But yeah, I had hit Morgan about the mid to late 80s, and I stayed there until about maybe 10 years later, maybe 15. I can't. Then I went back to UDC, which was interesting. But I left there and started doing my travelings from 85 to about 2002 to the continent. Every summer, I'll be out of here. Spring of winter break, I'm out of here, you know, because I said, look, I got to learn something. I can't learn it. I mean, the brothers and sisters in the street had the rhetoric of African redemption and all this, but they weren't telling me anything until I said, well, look, I need to remove this. I can't tell my students that they should, of the greatness of Africa, unless I myself at least be able to taste it a little bit by at least touching the ground. And I was lucky that I did meet some people that really helped me out and learned a lot. Went to Kemet. Of course, I went there with Dr. Ben. So, when I went with Dr. Ben, he made sure you understood something. All right, when you left there, even though you was in the 110-degree heat, in the center and middle and the south, you learned something, and I learned a lot just on Kemet. And then when I went further south, like you said, Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, I began to learn the impact of the lake system and its contribution to the development of the continent as I was trained and educated. So it was a worthwhile experience.
So these tours were these educational tours that you would organize for, they were available for students or from people in the community, or how did that work?
Well, they were organized by the school. Like when I was UDC, I worked with the education department. In fact, it was the adult education department. And what they would try to do is to bring professors, and they had a campus in Kenya that they had developed a relationship with. They would try to bring Kenyan professors over to UDC, and they in turn would, exchange. All right, so I was on the tour that did a tour throughout Kenya. In fact, I remember it distinctly because one of the tours, I think the next year when I organized one myself, I remember coming back to the US on British Air. I was reading the Financial Times, and it was talking about the proliferation of HIV and AIDS, and people were dying faster in Western Kenya and Northwestern Kenya faster than you could blink. I spent 3 weeks there, nobody was dying.
Right.
I was hitting the medical centers, clinics, and diarrhea, malaria. That was it. So I knew that's when I got a little bit suspicious about the reporting of this disease that's supposed to be killing everybody. I had just left there. I spent 3 weeks there, man, all in Western Kenya. I hadn't hit the South, Central. I left Nairobi, went over there to the Kisumu area. Then I went up north, close to Ugandan border. And, people was dying from the, not dying. They was just having their regular bout with the environmentals that brought on certain sicknesses, all right, which was mostly dysentery, malaria, what have you. And they were being treated. And that's what we wanted to do, to hit the clinics. We wanted to learn from that, because in the adult education, as they was doing there, it was trying to match up skills that would be necessary in order to help the professors as well as the students learn about the environments and the interaction in order to prepare the students better who felt the service to the community out of which they came. All right, so their intent was to always make sure that the students was trained in a manner in which they could share with them the benefits of what they've learned. And so it was excellent opportunity for me to work with and I was teaching math, but I was enlightened by the adult education and education division, because they were taking the trips. Nobody else would take the trips. All right, let me go on.
That's real interesting, because at the University of District of Columbia, I just kind of knew general information about UDC or Howard, but I know that this was not happening at Morgan, where I was, because that's where we had connected,
Right.
Because
right.
I transferred to Morgan in '84, and it was a great experience for me as a young undergraduate student who was in for the first time, and I was in an all-Black environment, and I was in super learning mode, and I heard a lot of students talking about it didn't make any sense that we have a historically Black college, and yet people can matriculate at Morgan and never learn anything about themselves. And so that first semester in fall of '84, I'm listening to these folks, and I said, it didn't make any sense. They're right. But then I recognized that this was just talk. It was just rhetoric, and the students weren't going to do anything about the problem and the contradiction. So in April of '85, that spring, I decided to organize students and start a petition. I remember I stayed up all night, literally, and wrote a petition to make.
I remember you walking around, man, with that. I said, "What's wrong with this brother?" Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, so I must have been there early. I must have been there in '85. Yeah, because I remember when you were doing the petition.
Yeah, that's kind of what I remember, that you were there when I was a graduate.
Yeah.
So we got thousands of petitions, and some students signed it. They agreed. Other students say, "Look, I'm graduating. It's not going to affect me." I said, "It's not about you. It's about legacy and making a contribution, because if we got the course passed, I would not have had to take it anyway, but it was about legacy and contributions." And as you probably remember, we had to fight against the president, Earl Richardson, and all those cronies that were just wanted to be in his good graces as the president. We had to fight against faculty in the philosophy department and English department, because their argument was, well, why should the history department have another required class? And I was a student voice and representative. I said it has nothing to do with a department having an extra class and hiring extra people. It's about us and what we need. And what the argument, so that was their argument, is that the history department shouldn't have extra class. And then the president was arguing that, well, at Johns Hopkins and at Towson, they don't have this. I said, well, first of all, you don't know what you're talking about, because they do have African history material. So if we couldn't find it at our library, we would go to those libraries to find material. So we had to shout the man down in his own office. And so when I started a petition drive, I had it organized. I told people, meet me on the bridge, and I want those signatures back. So so then
I remember. I remember.
So
yeah, you made an impression, brother. You made an impression. We didn't see that too. I didn't see it in the schools that I was in, UDC, a little bit maybe, but it was good to see you there doing that thing. Yes, and you inspired. You may not have known it, but you inspired a number of students. Man, we used to have debates from your activity. Yeah, they would come to class, because I used to open it up for about maybe 10, 15 minutes. Everybody talk about what's going on. Then we get serious with some math. I want to tell them, man, it's math wasn't just all about numbers, man. It was about your experience, right? And so, man, you inspired a lot of folks. They talk about, yeah, brother Manu. I said, okay, all right. Yeah, man.
Yes, sir. I appreciate it. And it took a couple of years, but now that class is a requirement. So every student in the state, they have to take the African diaspora class. And I think the last time I was there was a homecoming some years ago, and I was in the bookstore just kind of meeting people, some parents coming in for homecoming. It was, some alumni I didn't really remember, but the bookstore manager, I was just walking around and I greeted him. He said, "You know what? You were my professor." Because when I finished at Morgan, my grad work, and I went overseas and began to do primary research in African studies, and I came back, I taught in fall of 1990 in the history department, but I walked away from it because I didn't understand the politics and the nonsense, and I didn't respect it. It was one thing looking at the professors from a student point of view, but then when I got on the other side, I said, I don't respect this.
You had to be faculty, and then you had to deal with politics.
I had to deal with the politics and nonsense. So I walked away. So the student told me, "So you know what? You were my professor." I thought he had me mistaken, and then he said something. He said, "Because you made us the first day we evaluated the authors of the world history textbook." So yeah, that was that was me. So then I asked him about a book, and he said, "Yeah, let me show you some." So he showed me the required book that they were using for the African diaspora class. I said, let me tell you something. That's the class that we made a requirement. And so I just kind of on the fly learned, and I looked through it, and there was something about Kemet and African civilizations. There's a little section on Diop. But that's the legacy. So everybody at Morgan State has to take the class. They have to learn a little something, and they don't even really understand the work that I did to help lead the campaign. And you might remember that I organized the Progressive Students Action Committee, or PSAC, to help organize students. We had a newsletter that I called it In Struggle. So like, so I would go to your class, Brother Gary Ware, my great mentor, late mentor, and some of the other progressive professors to make announcements in their class and distribute In Struggle, which we typed up in the history department. But you were there, you were there, you made it. And it wasn't just on campus, but we would go to the ASCAC conferences, we would go to the lectures, local community. And I remember that you were so supportive and involved with the work that you, myself, and Brother Gary Ware, Brother Walimu, as I called him, we started the Taseti work study.
Yeah, you remember that? Yeah.
What are some of your thoughts about some of that work on campus?
Man, that work is some of the more memorable work because the study group or a study session, I call it study group. All right, begin to, other than certain professors that made it a requirement to take certain courses, the students really didn't have a chance to learn very much about themselves, about their community, and particularly Africa. All right, the study group encapsulated us to be able to strengthen our skills, to learn and go out there because, like I said, man, I got degrees in math and physics, didn't know anything about Kemet, the Nile Valley. And so, or activities of our own people who were doing stuff here, all right? The Carter G. Woodsons and what have you. So that kind of activity enabled me as a professor, once a student, to begin to transmit and indulge and engage our student population, particularly in your classes. So it really strengthened me. At the same time, it built a fortification because working with you brothers, you, Gary, a couple of sisters that was in there, all right, an opportunity to solidify, which is one of the things I think must happen right now. I mean, things are getting very bad right now. And it might go outside of scope of being able to talk about them right now, but things are getting bad and we're being fragmented. The study group, the group that came together, all right, and begin to learn things, begin to develop a cultural bond, as I believe, all right, that strengthens them. You would make calls on the phone, and see what's going on and stuff like that. It allows you to be able to identify what kind of programs is happening in the community, and then, demonstrations you might want to be at and stuff like that. So it was really empowering to me to be able to belong to a group and learn from that group, both the young and older population, and to engage and to exchange. The most important thing, the ability to exchange, to see how, in fact, it was reverberating with the younger population, because that's always is you want to be able to transmit and reproduce. What you learn, you would like to be able to reproduce with the younger population, and you get a chance, an opportunity to see how that's going. And that helps you, all right, because then you have to go out there and then you have to fight some of the Negroes. And and you needed that, man. And they were out there, brother. And look, I had to go and go to the Congressional Black Caucus thing. I didn't want to do it, man. On September they have their thing, and I said, all right, let me go there. And man, the women was out with their nails showing, and the brothers had their $500 suits on, and at this work study and talking about this nonsense, trying to show their importance. And the only importance that they showed was how much they had recapitulated and been compromised by the man. And so you had to sit there with a straight face because you didn't want to make enemies. At least I had to sit there. I felt I had to sit there with a straight face, not to make enemies, but at the same time, because I had gotten in the ASCAC, but I also had gotten into the reparation movement thing, all right, and Cobra, all right, and then Cobra used to, go on the Hill, all right, used to go to those events, try to get Black folks to pass their HR 40, which was the bill at the time demanding a study in reparations, all right, to address the harms committed. So I had to go there, you know. I said, well, look, I'll go there, but I'm not the person to talk to these people because I think that they're clowns. And I don't want that to come out, you know. But I'm saying we can talk about strategies later. But you're the person. You got to know how to be able to talk to them. I'm not the person to go there and talk to them. You know, I'm the person to be right by them and listen and read them. But I can't talk to them because you know, I might go off somewhere. But anyway, that was the experience of the day, man. I'm telling you, it was an experience right now. But it was from that time that you know, we learned a little bit.
Yeah, you know, and I remember, you know, very vividly, you know, the impact we were making, because once I started to organize students in spring of '85 with the petition, and then Brother Gary got involved, and Gary and I spent twice as much time with him than all the students combined. I mean, Gary, you know, he was very active and you know, I would say, I'm trying to find another term, but active and aggressive in terms of providing support. You know, I didn't have to find him, he would find me. And, you know, and you remember Gary, every day he had a ton of newspapers. Hey, brother, man. So he's giving out newspapers and making copies. So he read 4, 5, 6 papers every day.
Every day.
And involved,
he made copies and give them to me, you know.
Absolutely. The whole packet. He had
the whole packet, man.
Whole packet.
Yeah.
And then if there was any event I missed because I had to work or something like that, I would always get the audio tape from him the next day. So, hey,
right.
Audio tape. So he engaged people, and because of his size as well, you know, his big size, a lot of folks would be intimidated, and they would be mentioning things, and Gary would take the idea or the conversation to a different level, and they would be puzzled. They would ask me later, what was he even talking about? But you know, but him being there and then kind of introducing me to more progressive folks on campus, you know, like yourself and others. And then not long we started the you know, the work study group.
The work study group.
And then eventually I became a graduate student in history and African American study. So we had myself, we had undergraduate students, we had professors like you and Brother Gary, and we had community people too. And the goal was, you know, to make our study real and relevant, that how do we learn about African tradition and culture and then apply it as well. And, you know, there was very few students who had that kind of broad approach, that, you know, we were studying not just for the sake of information, but how do we make the information actionable and then merge the campus with community concerns as well. So those were formidable years for me, you know, and you were part of that nucleus as an elder brother who was a professor on campus, and we were learning collectively. And so it was an important time for me, because I spent more time with Brother Gary and yourself than I did with students my age. So and then my whole focus was to learn and study and fine tune the craft of research and investigation by looking at credible sources. And I was, you know, already familiar with some of the great scholars you mentioned, Ben and Clark. And also, you know, I also had a benefit as well on campus, because Dr. Rosalind Terborg Penn in history taught me primary research methods. She had mentioned that the great Benjamin Quarles, even though he was retired, he still had an office in the library. All of us in the class heard that, but nobody took it seriously or made it practical. But for me, I said, what? Benjamin Quarles had an office. So I remember I was down in the mailroom one day with Gary, and I was putting the In Struggle newsletter in all of the mailboxes for the faculty. And then Gary just said, he looked, he said, there he goes. And he didn't say anything else. And I looked, trying to figure out what he was referring to, and I saw this elder walking very slow, and I said, that must be Benjamin Quarles. And that's when I introduced myself. And from that day on, we had regular meetings in his office in the library. And that's when I learned amazing things about the Black experience in the U.S. I would never believe these stories if I wasn't listening to one of the great historians of our time. You know? So I had all of these influences that helped provide the foundation, including my father, who was in the Oakland, California area, holding it down with WSYP Community Church and also Marcus Books. So he would always be sitting.
I remember when your father came to Baltimore, man.
Yes.
And you met me. Yeah, I remember that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So all of those influences are very, very important. And so a lot of times people, they don't recognize, you know what they think, like you mentioned, these Negroes, they think that, particularly out here on the West Coast, they think that if you go to an HBCU, then by definition, we all made it and everybody's progressive, everybody is pro-Black, pro-African. But I remember that not only is that's fantasy and falsehood, but something that Gary mentioned, it helped put it in context in one sentence. I remember he said, brother, man, he was talking about Morgan State. He said, you got to look at this place as a colonial African government.
Exactly.
Exactly. And that's what it was. So to find brothers and elders like yourself is rare. But people think, oh yeah, everybody's on the same. No. And I recognize I'll be fighting some of these Afro-Saxons for the rest of my life because we agreed on nothing.
Yeah, that's that was it. That was a learning experience. And you mentioned something a little earlier, man, about applying what you learn, as opposed to, learning this stuff and then going out there and trying to beat people over the head. You didn't know, you don't know this? No, man, you got to apply this. All right. And so that opportunity was rare because once you got the information, from my experience there, once I got the information, it was extremely difficult to talk to my peers, man, particularly. I couldn't talk to anybody in the math department. And you would think they, well, look, man, foundation of science, you're supposed to want to be able to practice and preach science. You learn something outside of your discipline. I mean, Gary was the only one I could really talk to, man, about things. We plot, I go over there at meetings in DC, all right, and see what's happening there, meeting people. In fact, I think that when I joined ASCAC was a consequence of, and this was back in the 80s also, all of this stuff happened around the 80s, culminated with the 80s, man. Then I remember going up to New York to see him in Harlem, give a presentation. The same next week, I went up to see Clark. He gave a presentation. Because they hadn't been to Morgan. At least I didn't see him at Morgan. I saw them in DC when I went there, but I think Gary had alerted me to the fact that they were in DC. All right, and then I drove up to Harlem, man. All right, to see the brothers. I saw them once or two times when I was in New Jersey, because I lived in Newark. All right, and Bell Lab was only about maybe 10 miles from where I lived. Nice urban white area, Bell Lab, laboratories, Murray Hill. You get out of town after dark, brother. You better shoot across over there to Newark. But anyway, it was living there and seeing all that activity, and then coming back here and seeing similar activity in the Baltimore, DC area, which was enriching. And like I said, there's one person that can inspire you and give you the wherewithal to say, well, it's good. I can meet somebody, I can talk to somebody. Brother Gary was that, because see, I didn't think that anybody, particularly as forthright and did the study. Gary used to pile, as a whole bunch of papers. I had to read the papers just to be able to communicate with him. He said, man, because he'd come back and say, man, what do you think of that article? So I got to read the paper, man. I'm up here trying to make my math assignments out. And at the same time, I got another assignment. He come back with all these paper clips. But it was good because he had a knowledge of what was going on in DC, because he lived in DC, I think, at the time. Let me see. Well, no, he was here, but then he commuted back to DC when he moved there, and during that whole period, the areas everywhere. He had that. You remember that old car he used to drive?
Yeah, the Volvo.
Volvo.
Yeah. The green Volvo.
The green Volvo. Yeah, man. Yeah, that was many a trip. So
That's what I remember. It's just like, so Gary was assertive, and so he commanded everybody to be informed, to know, and to be active. So in other words, what are you doing? And like you said, did you read this? And then there was like a few faculty that were positive, but they weren't on, they weren't in the same category, the same level of being African centered and really being there in the trenches in the community. They were more like positive faculty on campus, but it was just on campus. But
We're
like
just on campus.
with Gary and then yourself, it's a different category altogether, of merging the campus and the community and being active. It's just very different. So, but I wanted to ask you too, though, what did you? I mean, because we how did you see some of the other students during your time? I mean, I was active. I was in the trenches just trying to make the best contribution I could and also keep my grades up.
Hey,
but yeah.
The students, like I said, were not, when I went to Morgan, at that time, just that time when, we used to take over schools. In fact, I was really stunned when I got out the military, went to Morgan, and next thing I know, we was at Annapolis taking over one of the buildings, and I'm trying to hold the door to keep the National Guard from coming in. I said, hold, brother, hold. But so that kind of activism, and then you bring it, where I'm teaching. So the students, what I say is this, that in addition to us learning from that experience, the man learned also, okay? He learned from that experience. He learned enough to make sure that there was sufficient number of very cool Negroes, all right, who could manage his Black school while at the same time reduce any kind of outbreak that might have happened a decade or two earlier, all right? And so what we found ourselves, except for yourself, man, because you didn't follow the norm. You said you had to make it another way, and so you went out there and led a group and petition and all that other kind of stuff. The students, you had to make the students, and I use when I say make, seriously had to make, because what you were experiencing is opposition, from the other peers that you had to associate with, because their thing was not necessarily to push any African nationalism. And if they push any nationalism, it would be based on how they saw advancing their particular class. I'll tell you what I mean by that in a minute. We were at that time in the 80s and 90s. I was really doing a lot of stuff on Africa. I was even trying to set up some business in Africa. My focus was how could we best try to utilize commerce, because I saw that as a foundation for what it would take, all right, for Black people to really make some inroads and lessen its dependency on the colonization that had taken place on this side of the hemisphere. We just call it ghetto instead of colony. All right, that's what we call it. All right, so I had an opportunity in my travels, all right, to say, how can we set up commerce? And so it was an opportunity when I went to the classroom to talk about sometimes my experience, all right? And then the fortification of that, all right, was when I would talk to Gary, because see, Gary knew and understood the politics, regardless of what level of government they have to operate, whether it's in Annapolis, Baltimore, or even up into the DC. So I had an opportunity to exchange and get his views on certain kind of things, and they were good. And then after joining from that experience, ASCAC, and learning from people in different parts of the country, it became clearer and clearer some of the things that we needed to do in order to stay fast, and then set the strategies necessary to inform the youth. something like you were doing, man, because you were a student movement. Then even after you were graduated, all right, and came back and taught. You know, you was very close and to the students. I know the students admire. I don't know if you knew that, but they did that because you were strong first and firm, you know, in your beliefs. And it wasn't like it was, you know, people at that time said, well, look, man, I'm gonna be a capitalistic nationalist. That's what they would tell me. All right. I say, yeah, what's that, man? You know, I say, go see Brother Manu. He'll get you straight. He'll get you straight, brother. You see. And they would go and talk to you, man. At least they said they would. All right. And so I remember one brother, I can't remember his name, but he was, hey, look, man, I just got some money in the stock market. I say, good. All right, what you gonna do? Hey, man, I'm gonna get rich, brother. That I'm gonna help the people. I say, are you sure about that? I say, go talk to Brother Manu, man. Maybe he got some ideas help you out. Yeah, but I'm telling you, it was I really loved the experience when I was teaching. I got in trouble with the administration and I left Morgan in '95, I guess. And I know how I got in trouble. They had I had my students doing a project and they was using the computer. All right, now I wasn't in it. You know, I had given them an assignment. They had to use the computer room. All right. So, and the person who was in charge of the assignment knew that I had my students using the room. Now, somebody had invited some faculty from Western Maryland, little white folks. They came there and made my students leave the computer room. And I said, so I confronted the woman who told my students to leave. I said, you don't teach at this university. How are you going to tell my students to leave the room because you want to sit down and give a presentation? All right. Then the white boy stood up behind, you know, like he's going to protect her. Here's this N-word right, talking to this woman, right? Yeah, here's this Negro talking to this woman. So I told her, you need to clear out because I'm gonna bring my students back in here, you know, and they're coming in here to do their assignment. Now, if you don't like it, you can take it up with the organizers, you know, who brought you here. And while you're doing that, tell them this is a Black school. And you don't, you don't tell me what to do in the school that I teach. So they went to the dean and everybody. I went to my department here. They went to the president, I guess, but they said, nah, you know, Shabaka is insulting us and all this other kind of stuff. So I told them that I was going to leave. I was taking some time off. So I left there about mid 90s, I guess, or something like that. Yeah. And I didn't really do anything. I continued my trips to the continent. I was trying to develop some business. And then when I came back here, is when I went to the community college that said that they needed me. And so I interacted with them a little bit. And taught math and nursing in the nursing program. All right. I went to the, now this is a BCCC, Baltimore City Community College, right? Okay. All right. Okay. Still a Black school. All right. The math here was Indian, East Indian. Hey, brother, you can't make this stuff up, you know. And then I told her I like to teach math. And she says, well, I told her I was, used to teach at UDC in Morgan. She said, okay. And so there must have been a transition between the department chairs at that time, because who came in there was a little Jewish girl that got to be head of the math department. And that was we clashed even before I got myself well known on the campus, because I was telling her student, one of her students, how to solve this math problem indirectly without having to go through the rigors. You know, she wanted proofs and all this other kind of stuff. I said, well, look, to help you understand it, do it this way. And so he did it that way. He handed the assignment in. She gave him an F, even though he got the assignment right. But he didn't do it her way. Okay. And so she saw me on campus. Right. He pointed her on campus as the person who showed her how to do it. She came over to me. Well, who are you? I said, well, I was just helping a student do an assignment. That's all. Well, we don't do it like that. Well, he didn't tell me what way you wanted it done. So I told him how to do it, you know, make him understand it. He seemed to understand at the time. So I knew I wasn't going to the math department. So, but somebody heard that I was very good at passing students, you know, in math. So then the nursing department reached out to me. All right. At that time, I was just doing a little consulting work. Okay. Because I had a little business that did a little consulting work. And so they reached out to me and I said, okay, well, I'll come here, you know, on a part-time basis because I travel to Africa. I don't really want anything to really disrupt that, you know, because I'm learning as I'm doing that. And so I stayed there until about the mid 2000, first decade of 2000, and I just retired back after that.
Yeah. Let me ask you this as we kind of close out the hour, just a couple of things, because I knew in general, because you were doing it through UDC and Morgan State was not progressive in terms of having study abroad or embracing Africa. So I kind of knew in general that you were doing the trips to Africa and because I kind of remember Kenya, Tanzania in general. So, but that's very significant that clearly was informing your instruction in the classroom, because that's even now that's rare. You know, faculty are not doing that today. Some are, but the vast majority don't even think of it that way at all. So that's really very significant. And also, in addition to that, the fact that you're in the STEM area. So, what's some of your your thoughts, or maybe concerns? Because in STEM, you know, Black folks are typically left out. And on our campus, I told the anti-Black racists and bigots and others that this anti-Blackness, where diversity means everybody other than us, is not going to continue, where you all hire everybody in STEM and nobody is of African descent. I said, this is absurd and unjustifiable. Then they start hiring some people here and there because I exposed their behinds publicly. But what's your views about it, since this is your area and you know that, you know, Black faculty are rare in the area and students don't go into this field because they're not supported?
They're not supported. And like the trips that I made to the continent, I would get material and I would bring it. In fact, that was part of my curriculum or lesson plan. You know, I would get everything there, and I would take things there because every once in a while I got to speak in the classroom. If I knew somebody was a professor, they let me speak in the classroom. And let me tell you how absurd it was. In East Africa, particularly in Tanzania and Kenya, what they used to do, you know, in the math classes, they would be calculating geometrically, you know, the dimension for swimming pools. Now, what the heck do Africans? So I tell them how to. I use the well example, you know, because wells, they made up wells, all right. And so instead of using the swimming pool, which they use the British books, all right, and with the white characters. And I told her, I said, you need to have darker characters here and have them doing stuff that's out there. Now, the students learn from that. As a consequence of bringing something that was related, all right, to the classroom, people got a little bit interested in those subjects supposedly that they were told they weren't supposed to do well in. But my students did well in them because I brought materials that was a little bit more concrete and relatable. The techniques that I saw professors using there, I try to apply to how I think professors might use that stuff here. If the paradigm here, you know, was not teaching paradigm here that I was using was not that effective. I forgot your question, man. I'm sorry.
No, it's just about the, you know, STEM, you know, the STEM area, and that Black folks are left out of the area, and but that's been your field, and you mentioned Kemet, and from Kemet we get chemistry and
Right.
so forth. So the African root of it is very important.
That's what I would try to show as best I could there. I try to show everything that was related. In fact, they had a textbook. You had a textbook that you had to read and use. All right, we had that, but I had reading material. All right, and I would make up reading material. And I got a lot of that from Gary, because Gary would have a lot of material that he got from the newspaper. And I said, well, look, I can read this stuff and I can make the kind of images that I want. All right. The thing was to try to show them the relationship of what they were learning, all right, to doing something practical. Now, I never told my students I'm trying to teach them to do math better so they can go out here and get a job. I said, what I want you to do is to create jobs where you are and then employ folks and teach them what you know. And so what I want you to know is how well you can do the math and the physics, all right, and apply it. All right, I want you to be able to tell your 6-year-old brother, how to do a differential equation. Now that's supposed to be a high math, in it. I said, I want you to be able to explain that to him or her, all right, and not make them fall asleep in your explanation of it. You do everything that you can to make it exciting. So I had students, they had to experiment. How would they change this to their younger brothers and sisters while at the same time making it, something that would interest them, all right, so that they could learn, all right. That lays the foundation to any of the higher educational opportunities, so-called, all right, that we would like to invest our students in, is to teach the thing simplistically, get all of, see, a lot of stuff that we teach is based on the instructor's ego. And so when I was at Howard, teacher would put about five boards of equation expressions. All right, turn around and says, did everybody get this? And so while people were they're on the second board, it's 5 boards. They're on the second board trying to make it out. And then he turned his back and then erase the first board so he could start writing over again. Okay, this thing was to show that he knew the stuff. Well, nobody wasn't learning from that. We needed to examine that. All right, that information. We need to tear it apart. He couldn't understand that he wasn't there just to be able to show that he had gotten his advanced degrees, knew how to write those formulas that his white instructor probably got from him at a PhD university, offering a university. But he just wanted to be able to show us how appreciative he was of that training and then show us that he learned something. I wanted the application, brother. The application. How we make that stuff applicable.
Yeah.
All right. And so everything was applicable.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
more practical. But brother Shabaka, I appreciate it. To get caught up and have you, share your experience over the decades of being in the trenches in the academic arena and connecting that to Africa,
Mhm.
and to know that you've definitely had an influence on my development and the contributions I began to make as a young student back in the 80s. So brother Sababu Shabaka, he's still holding it down.
Thank you, brother. You made an impact too, that there were students out there who were eager to learn. That's always a good thing.
Yes,
Who were
sir.
eager to learn and did learn. Okay.
Yes, sir. Well,
Yes,
I appreciate you, my brother. So
Thank
folks,
you.
you are listening to another important episode of Africana Studies. And so keep it locked right here to WSYP LP 95.1 FM in Birmingham, Alabama. And I'm the professor. And always go to my website, advancingtheresearch.org. And you can also check me out on social media. Contact me at Manu Ampim@gmail.com. Until next time, advancing the work.